No cameras. No records. Just whispers. Inside Angola prison, it wasn't the inmates who ran the place, it was the guards. A secret brotherhood hidden behind badges and Bible verses. What began as loyalty became control. What began as discipline turned into ritual. And when the truth finally leaked, one question echoed through every locked cell. How do you expose corruption when the system itself is the secret? Like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to leave the prison walls. The rain had been falling over Angola for 3 days straight, turning the old dirt roads into rivers of rust and mud. Floodlights flickered through the mist, cutting across the razor wire like ghostly halos. Somewhere beyond the levees and swamps, the Mississippi groaned, swollen and restless, like the place it guarded. Inside the prison walls, night didn't mean silence. It meant whispers. Metallic, low, and deliberate, the sound of boots echoing through B-tier, a restricted section few inmates ever saw and fewer survived. Guards called it the Shadow Wing. Officially, it didn't exist. There were no shift logs, no assigned posts, no camera feeds. The paperwork showed it as storage and maintenance. But the men who had worked there, or claimed to, told a different story. It wasn't maintenance, said one former corrections officer, his voice trembling through a recorded phone call. It was where discipline went to die. Where loyalty was tested. That recording was part of a whistleblower packet leaked in 2017, buried for years until a journalist named Eli Sanderson got his hands on it. Sanderson had been chasing prison corruption across Louisiana for nearly a decade. But nothing prepared him for what he'd find buried inside Angola's forgotten files. The first piece of evidence was a handwritten memo dated 2009. Wing operations to proceed under night cover. Authorized personnel only. Orders from Kane's Circle. That one line was enough to unravel an entire decade of hidden power. Sanderson drove to Angola that summer, just as the morning fog lifted over the cane fields. The air smelled like wet earth and iron. He was stopped 3 times before he even reached the main gate. At each checkpoint, the same look from the guards, suspicion masked as politeness. "You sure you're cleared for this, sir?" Inside, Angola felt less like a prison and more like a kingdom. A self-contained world ruled by uniform and ritual. The chapels, the fields, the rodeo, all symbols of redemption on the surface. But beneath it lay a quiet hierarchy no visitor ever saw. A retired guard, Harold Red Lemaire, was the first to break that silence. He had worked Angola for 22 years. After retiring in 2014, he disappeared from Baton Rouge and resurfaced years later, living alone in a trailer near a Atchafalaya basin. That's where Sanderson found him. Lemaire agreed to talk, but not on camera. He made Sanderson leave his phone outside, unplugged the TV, and spoke only after pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. "You ever hear of Section G?" "I thought this was about the Shadow Wing," Sanderson said. "It is." Section G was the code name. Started out small. Just a few of us doing night rotations. Nothing illegal at first, then it changed. Lemaire described a network of guards who called themselves the Circle. Not an official unit, but a brotherhood, men who believed they were protecting the prison by taking justice into their own hands. When an inmate crossed a line, attacked a staff member, disrespected a ranking officer, filed too many grievances, the Circle handled it. No paperwork. No witnesses. "They said it was for order," Lemaire muttered, staring into his glass. "But we started enjoying it. That's when I knew it was over." He told Sanderson about rituals, late-night meetings inside the old laundry wing, guards gathering in the dark with flashlights off. They'd circle up, vote on who needed teaching, and the next night, that inmate would be gone from the dorms. Transferred to maintenance. When Sanderson asked what teaching meant, Lemaire paused. "Sometimes a beating. Sometimes worse. Depends who you ask." Sanderson's recorder caught the sound of the wind howling through the trailer door, and Lemaire's whisper after a long silence. "There are things under those floors, son. Things you don't want to find. The next day, Sanderson drove back toward Baton Rouge. His car was followed for 40 miles. A white Department of Corrections pickup, no license plate. Every time he slowed down, it slowed too. When he pulled off the road, it stopped at the same distance. Then, just as the highway curved east, the truck vanished into the cane fields. Within a week, Sanderson received an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside, a single Polaroid. It showed the interior of a dim hallway, concrete stained dark at the corners. The date scribbled on the bottom, October 12, 2011. That was the same night an inmate named Marcus Dunn was listed as escaped from Angola. But Dunn's family insisted he never made it past the gates. His last letter home mentioned being reassigned to maintenance duty. By 2018, Sanderson had pieced together what no one else dared say publicly: Dunn hadn't escaped, he had been taken to the Shadow Wing. And the men who took him were wearing state uniforms. Word of Sanderson's investigation spread quietly among former staff. Some warned him to stop. Others slipped him coded messages through anonymous tips. One read simply: "Look for the Burn Ledger." The Burn Ledger was Angola's ghost book, an unofficial log rumored to list disciplinary actions that never appeared in the Department of Corrections database. When inmates went missing or transferred, their names sometimes appeared there first. Sanderson traced the book to a storage facility in West Feliciana Parish, rented under a fake company name. It took him 3 nights of watching before he saw anyone go in. The man who finally arrived was Sergeant Mitchell "Mitch" Boudreau, one of the guards rumored to lead the circle. Sanderson waited until Boudreau left, then slipped inside. The air was thick with mildew and dust. Old uniforms, boxes of payroll sheets, and one metal file drawer chained shut. Inside that drawer, he found 3 black binders marked with grease pencil, GOPS 2008 to 2012. Each page was a list, inmate names, dates, and single-word annotations: lesson, cleansed, moved. And at the bottom of every page, the same initials, SBG. Sanderson didn't understand what they meant until months later, when Lemaire called him one last time. "SBG," he whispered. It stood for Society of Brotherhood Guards. That was us. The line went dead. 2 days later, Lemaire's trailer burned down. The fire marshal ruled it an accident, faulty wiring. But Sanderson's notes from that day record a single sentence. The circle just erased one of its own. What began as loyalty had turned into a machine. One that fed on silence, secrecy, and fear. And somewhere deep inside Angola's Shadow Wing, that machine was still running. Sanderson returned to Angola under a false pretext, a researcher from a small Louisiana college writing about prison reform. The new warden, younger and more PR-friendly, granted him a 2-day clearance, unaware of what he was really there for. The first thing Sanderson noticed was the silence. Angola's air was usually thick with noise, chain gangs singing in the fields, officers shouting roll call, the clatter of meal trays. But around the old service corridor near Camp J, the world went quiet. The concrete walls swallowed sound like a tomb. The guard escorting him, a stout man named Harris, noticed his eyes drifting. "That area's off limits," he said, motioning with his flashlight. "Maintenance wing," Sanderson replied casually. "Didn't know it was still in use." Harris gave a half-smile. "It ain't." Yet a heavy door at the end of that corridor was new, freshly painted, steel bolts gleaming. A black stencil read "Authorized staff only." The kind of door that dares you to ask what's behind it. That night, Sanderson wrote a note to himself in his motel room: "The wing still breathes." The next morning, he met a chaplain who'd worked Angola for 15 years, a quiet man named Reverend Nolan. The chaplain agreed to talk, but only in the chapel, with the organ playing to cover their voices. "You're asking about the circle," Nolan said, hands folded tight. "I've heard the name," Sanderson replied. "Then you know they ran this place." "Not by orders, by fear. They made rules of their own. If a guard wasn't with them, he'd find himself reassigned, or worse." Worse? There are graves in the fields that never had markers. And some of them ain't inmates. Nolan's eyes glimmered under the flickering bulb. He reached into his Bible and slid out a faded photo, 5 men in uniform, posing proudly in front of a broken gate. One of them was Lemaire. Another was Sergeant Boudreau. On the back, 3 letters again, SBG. Sanderson asked where the photo came from. Locker room wall, Nolan said. Before it vanished. After that, people stopped mentioning the wing. I kept this one because I knew someday, someone would come looking. That night, Sanderson sneaked back into the restricted corridor. He'd managed to get a master key, lifted from a guard's coffee mug while they watched a rodeo replay. Inside, the hallway reeked of old bleach and rust. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Along the walls, hooks held torn uniforms, old belts, even an abandoned riot helmet. Then the corridor bent sharply left, and there it was. A black door with no handle, sealed by a coated padlock. Above it, faintly etched into the paint, were the same 3 letters, SBG. He set his recorder on. The hum of the fluorescent light vibrated through the air. "This is Sanderson, inside the restricted service wing," he whispered. "No security presence. Door marked SBG, appears newer than surrounding infrastructure." He turned his flashlight downward and saw scuff marks on the floor, recent ones. Boots, dragging, and something else. Scrapes. Like metal being pulled. Then came the sound. A low thud, once, twice, followed by a faint groan. Human, or something close. Sanderson froze. His breath misted. He killed the light and waited. Nothing. Just silence. But when he turned the flashlight back on, a shadow moved past the gap at the bottom of the door. He ran. Later that night, back in Baton Rouge, he played the recording frame by frame. Between the static hum and his footsteps, another sound bled through, a voice. It said, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." He replayed it 10 times. It wasn't his voice. Sanderson went dark for 3 weeks after that. Friends said he was paranoid, seeing cars following him, hearing clicks on his phone line. Then, a letter arrived at his rented P.O. box. No signature. Just a single line. "You want proof? Visit Block 9, Cell 3, Wednesday midnight." The letter was dated 3 days earlier, meaning the meeting had already passed. But when Sanderson drove to Angola again, a strange thing happened. His clearance was revoked. The warden said his research credentials had been flagged by the state. That night, an inmate inside Angola named David Klein sent a note through a chaplain's cousin, a note that would reopen everything. "We see you, reporter. The circle still runs nights. I work the wing. I know where they buried Dunn." Klein had been an orderly in the infirmary, a quiet inmate with 20 years on a drug charge. He claimed to have witnessed guards taking bodies through a back gate behind the canteen after lights out. The destination, he said, was a trench behind the abandoned grain silos. "They called it the Garden," Klein wrote. "Where weeds don't grow." Sanderson knew he had to verify it. He met Klein's cousin behind a diner off Highway 61, handed over a burner phone, and waited. 2 nights later, the phone buzzed once, a single text. "Midnight. North Levee Road. Follow the lights." When he arrived, fog blanketed the fields. Through it, faint lanterns glowed near the silos. 3 men in DOC uniforms were digging. No headlights, no trucks. Just shovels. Sanderson filmed from a distance, zoomed in, and caught a glimpse of a 4th man holding a clipboard. The same posture as Boudreau. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the field. Someone had spotted him. He sprinted back to his car, camera clutched tight. A bullet shattered the rear glass as he sped off. When he uploaded the footage to an encrypted server, the video showed 6 seconds of clear imagery. A shallow trench. A shape inside a tarp. And a guard's shoulder patch, Louisiana Department of Corrections. Within a week, Boudreau resigned from Angola. Officially, personal reasons. Unofficially, he disappeared. Then, something strange happened. The warden who had blocked Sanderson's access called him directly. His tone was low, almost defeated. "You don't know what you're stirring up, son. That wing was built for a reason. You dig deep enough, and you'll find the state's fingerprints on it too." When Sanderson pressed him, the line clicked dead. Months later, an envelope arrived from a private investigator in Shreveport, an old contact. Inside were personnel rosters from 2008 to 2012. Highlighted in red were 12 names. All corrections officers. All assigned to special night rotation. Every single one cross-linked to Boudreaux's signature. And next to each, a second signature. That of a deputy commissioner from the Department of Public Safety. It wasn't just a secret society of guards. It was a sanctioned experiment in control. A shadow program funded through disciplinary research. The revelation broke Sanderson. He spent weeks piecing it together: payroll budgets, grant documents, construction invoices. The Shadow Wing wasn't an accident of corruption, it was a design. A forgotten pilot program from 2008 intended to study behavioral compliance in high-risk inmates. Somewhere along the way, science turned into punishment, and punishment turned into pleasure. The Brotherhood of Guards, the SBG, had been its enforcers. By the time Sanderson prepared his exposé, 3 of his informants were dead. 2 fires, 1 car crash. All ruled accidents. The last message he ever received came from Klein, smuggled out through a guard sympathetic to the cause. "They found the tapes. I won't make it out. But if people know the name, maybe the ghosts can rest." The following week, Klein's body was found hanging in his cell. The note on his bunk read, "Tell the truth about the wing." Sanderson disappeared soon after. His apartment cleared out, files missing, bank accounts frozen. Only one thing remained in his office: a recorder still running, whispering static. And through that static, faintly, a voice again. "You shouldn't have come back." Months passed before anyone dared to speak the name Sanderson out loud again. His disappearance spread quietly across Louisiana's journalist circles, a man who got too close to a story that didn't want to be told. Some said he'd fled to Texas under an alias. Others believed he was dead. But a rumor began in late 2020 that one of his drives had survived. A young reporter named Vanessa Doyle, working for an independent outlet out of Baton Rouge, received an encrypted email from an unknown address. No message, just an attachment, sbg_archive.zip. When she opened it, she found photos, recordings, and a 47-minute video file. The first image stopped her cold, the same black door marked SBG that Sanderson had described. In the video, grainy, handheld footage showed what appeared to be a hidden chamber beneath the wing. At first glance, it looked like an old storage basement. But as the camera panned, the light caught something that didn't belong there: 4 iron hooks bolted into the concrete ceiling, chains still hanging. Beneath them, scorch marks. On the tape, Sanderson's voice trembled. "These walls aren't for maintenance. This was ritual." Vanessa knew she was watching a man document his final discovery. And whatever he'd uncovered in that basement was the reason he never made it out. She began her own investigation, retracing his last steps. Angola's administration stonewalled her, refusing interviews. Former guards hung up the moment she said his name. But one contact, a nurse named Clara Voss, who worked in the infirmary during those years, finally agreed to meet. They met in a church parking lot outside St. Francisville. Clara looked nervous, chain smoking through the conversation. "You want to know about the Shadow Wing?" she asked. "Then you have to understand something. Those men weren't just corrupt. They believed they were chosen." "Chosen for what?" Vanessa asked. "To purge weakness. To cleanse Angola from the inside out." She described how guards from the circle took communion together every Sunday before night shift. The chaplain called it the Brotherhood service, though it was never on the chapel's schedule. They'd kneel, pray, and vow to keep order through suffering. "They said pain brought obedience," Clara whispered. "They even marked each other. burn scars on the wrist, shaped like a ring. If you saw that, you knew not to ask questions. Vanessa noticed the faint outline of one such mark on Clara's own wrist. She looked away quickly. I was young, Clara said. They told us we were saving souls. The next week, Vanessa filed public record requests for Angola's maintenance expenditures from 2008 to 2012. Most came back redacted, entire pages blacked out. But one line item remained visible: subterranean reinforcement, Camp J extension, $142,000. She matched the coordinates to the old silo field Sanderson had mentioned, and what she found next made her blood run cold. The extension was directly below that ground. Vanessa drove to the site under cover of fog. The prison perimeter fence was still active, but the silos beyond were abandoned, half sunk into the mud. She parked a mile off and approached on foot. Her flashlight beam caught the remnants of a collapsed hatch, rusted hinges, a bent lock, and a faint smell of charred wood rising from below. She climbed down. The tunnel descended 20 feet, curving sharply into darkness. Every step echoed. The walls were lined with faded chalk markings, initials, dates, and crude symbols. At the end of the corridor stood a single metal door, half torn from its hinges. Inside was a narrow chamber filled with debris, old restraints, decaying uniforms, a broken radio. And on the far wall, written in what looked like paint or rust, the words, "The Circle watches." Vanessa steadied her breath and began recording. This is Vanessa Doyle, documenting what appears to be the remnants of the shadow wing beneath Angola prison. Then the light flickered. Somewhere behind her, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. She turned, beam shaking. Who's there? No response. Just the sound of dripping water. When she climbed back out, dawn was breaking over the fields. A white truck sat parked near the road, unmarked, engine idling. She didn't wait to see who was inside. Back in Baton Rouge, she uploaded her footage to a secure server and reached out to an old contact in Washington, a civil rights lawyer named Anthony Reeve. Reeve had worked prison reform cases for decades. When Vanessa showed him the footage, he sat in silence for nearly a minute. You realize what this means, he said finally. If those facilities were funded through state contracts, this isn't just corruption. It's systemic torture on government payroll. Together, they compiled a report, cross-referencing financial data, whistleblower testimonies, and Sanderson's original files. They titled it The Brotherhood Experiment. Before publication, they sent a courtesy notice to the Department of Justice. Within 48 hours, Reeves' office was broken into. Computers wiped. Hard drives missing. Vanessa went underground, sending her remaining files to multiple journalists with one instruction: if I vanish, publish everything. 2 weeks later, The Guardian ran an international feature, Inside Angola's Secret Wing, The Guards Who Became God. The story went viral. Lawmakers demanded inquiries. Angola officials denied everything. No evidence, they said. No facility by that name. But then, the photographs surfaced. A former construction worker leaked blueprints showing a subterranean level under Camp J. The documents confirmed a sealed wing built in 2008, later listed as decommissioned maintenance. Excavation orders followed. For the first time in history, Angola's earth was dug not to build, but to reveal. What they found beneath the silos was not a cell block. It was a ritual room. Chains fused into the ceiling. Marks of old fires. And along one wall, 12 engraved initials, the same 12 guards Sanderson had traced years before. Buried beneath a layer of lime were skeletal remains, 6 in total. The forensic team confirmed one belonged to Marcus Dunn. The discovery shattered Angola's public image. Lawsuits piled up. 2 former wardens resigned. The state called it rogue behavior by isolated staff. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't isolation. It was architecture. Vanessa's footage became the centerpiece of a federal investigation. The media called it the Wing Affair. A congressional report 2 years later concluded. The Shadow Wing operated as an unauthorized disciplinary site. Its existence was known to several ranking officials. No prosecution followed. By then, the files had already vanished. The state bulldozed the site, filled the tunnels, and sowed grass over the ground. Angola's garden grew again. But at night, inmates said they still heard noises from beneath, boots pacing, doors slamming, muffled voices reciting prayers that didn't sound holy anymore. One guard, newly assigned to that sector, told a journalist anonymously. "Sometimes we find footprints down by the silos. Bare ones. And nobody ever walks there barefoot." As for Vanessa, she resurfaced a year later, releasing a final video recorded before she went into hiding. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Angola built its walls on faith and fear. But faith without truth is just another kind of prison. The men who ran the wing believed they were saving the system. In reality, they became its ghost. The video ends with her walking down a foggy levee road, camera facing backward. In the distance, a faint light flickers near the horizon, a white truck's headlights, disappearing into the mist. No one has heard from her since. And deep inside Angola, where the earth still breathes through the cracks of its buried history, the circle's whispers remain, unseen, unheard, but never gone. They say every prison holds its ghosts, but Angola's don't haunt the cells. They haunt the silence. The kind that lingers after the gates close, after the chains rattle, after the last confession echoes down a concrete hall. What was the Shadow Wing, really? A secret society? A corruption of faith? Or just the inevitable truth of power left unchecked? Maybe it wasn't built by evil men at all, but by ordinary ones who started believing they were righteous. Who thought their violence could purify the world. When the circle formed, they called it brotherhood. But brotherhood without mercy becomes a weapon. And in Angola, that weapon turned inward, until the line between punishment and pleasure disappeared. The guards believed they were the last guardians of order. That pain could save a soul. But they were wrong. Because in places like Angola, control is an illusion, and the walls remember everything. Every scream. Every lie. Every night when the air smelled like bleach and smoke. Eli Sanderson tried to bring light into that darkness. Vanessa followed his trail, and for a brief moment, the world listened. But systems like this don't die from exposure. They bury themselves, wait, and breathe again through new uniforms, new names, new rules. The Shadow Wing may be gone, but its idea, that secrecy justifies sin, still survives wherever fear does. And maybe that's the real prison, the one that doesn't need walls at all. Somewhere in the Mississippi night, the wind cuts through the old cane fields. The soil is shifted, the tunnels sealed, but the ground still hums when it rains. They say if you stand by the silos long enough, you can hear it, faint, rhythmic, like boots marching below the earth. 12 steps. A pause. Then 12 more. The circle, keeping their watch. Because in Angola, the past never stays buried. It just waits for someone else to dig it up. Fade out. Soft hum of wind. A final whisper beneath the static, barely audible. Order through suffering. Then silence.